is time for part 2 of Strangers. For this section, my book club read chapters 23 through 48. So we're now just slightly over halfway, because I think in chapter 48 was a bit longer than the other chapters had been. So I think it technically, it just bumped it over just that little bit, but that's alright. So just like last time, I wanted to go over the questions that I'd asked for my book club and kind of my thoughts on them, and then do just kind of a general review for my thoughts of our part 2 that we did. So let's get going. Alright, for question 1, starting on page 96, quoting from page 96, technology had become, he realized, not merely a tool, but a proof of life. No startup sounds? Why, you might as well be dead. And then the question for it was, do you agree, disagree? And then I was hoping there'd be a little bit of discussion. This question hasn't gotten as much response as I was thinking it might at this point, but there still has been some discussion on where we feel like we fall in technology and stuff. And my own personal opinion with this is that I do think that technology is, in a lot of cases, still a really good and important tool. It's letting me have my book club in the first place and have a means like that to be socializing. But then there are things to think about too, like if you look at electricians or plumbing or running a car, all these kinds of things that because of technology, the fields have gotten so much more specialized, and we just don't have the means in a single person most of the time to know how to do things. And so it's kind of scary, the idea that if we lose some of our means to have access to that technology and the people who actually know how to use those specialized things, that we don't always know how to cope with situations. And so it kind of makes me want to try to improve my knowledge and maybe try to branch out in some of those things that I know less about in case emergencies were to arise, that I'd be able to at least do something to help myself get through them. So that's kind of where that question was for me, and kind of why I wanted to ask it to people too, because I'd had that realization of, we're kind of without certain things if we don't have technology functioning like it's supposed to, and that's kind of scary. So that's where that was. Alright, and then for the second question that I asked, in chapter 32, we see the reappearance of their dog, Socrates. So I asked if my book club was surprised by what happened to Socrates, if they'd even remembered that Socrates had been in the book at all. And I personally don't remember exactly where it was in the story, but there was a point probably in the late 20s chapter, so probably around chapter 27-ish, where I had a moment where I was like, I wonder what happened to the dog. Didn't they have a dog? And then I completely forgot about it and didn't think about it again until he turned up again in chapter 32. And so I think it's a good sign of how engaging the story is that I just completely forgot about the dog. But I also felt really bad for the dog because he's very dead and in a not fun way. And it was like, oh, poor puppy. I feel so bad. I hate it when animals die. And so that was my thoughts on that. And that was just kind of a quick little fun one. I mostly was curious if people had remembered that the dog even existed, because I had mostly forgotten about him. So it was just one of those things what are you noticing as you read? Does it matter? Is it helping you engage with the story? Anyway, and then we've got the third question that I asked on page 126. Jerry talks about how he wants to get out of the situation that they're in, being trapped in the house, but not so much for himself, but for his family and especially for his kids. And he goes on to say that he basically feels like he deserves to be in that situation. He feels like he's a failure, that he caused the family to be caught up in that situation. So I asked my book club if they felt like they agreed, if they disagreed, if, based on the things we've seen from Jerry, if you think it is his fault. Where I fall in this is I don't think it's specifically his fault. Based on what we've seen of our antagonist and what he said about just kind of the family in general, and then as we've moved further in this part, how he was talking to the mom on the phone and things, it seems to me like it's going to build up a story where each character is culpable to some degree for the family being caught up in this situation, but also based on some of the things that's going on with Jerry, I don't think we've currently seen what entirely he's culpable for, except for maybe some relation to his son's death being partly why he's responsible. But there have been hints that maybe he's had some infidelity or something too, because he keeps talking about this woman and not giving anything else away beyond that. So we'll see. But I have a feeling that it's going to turn out that there will be things like that from all of the characters, because by the end of chapter 48, we've got to the point that we know the mom's been showing infidelity and stuff. The kids don't even get along with each other super much, and they definitely don't get along with their parents, and there could be other things going on there that are going to come up too. So I'll be interested to see what reasoning the antagonist has at the end, because I think that's going to build into some of the story and is possibly part of why it's called Strangers too, because we've already shown that their family relationship is pretty shattered since the son died, but I think it's going to show that they were strangers to each other even before that because of the things like the infidelity going on, maybe whatever with this other woman's going on with Jerry, and maybe some stuff that's going on with the kids too, and we'll see. And then for my fourth question, on page 136 going into 137, you can see the metal outside the house. That's the sort of thing that people investigate, right? I mean, someone drives down a street and sees a nice house with chunks of metal all over the windows, they call someone, don't they? So my question with this, would you call in that situation? Do you think it would even be recognizable to see like the metal that's been put on their windows from the street, especially in a house like theirs that's gated and set back from the street, all that kind of a thing. So I don't know that I would call in this situation, but I think there are potentials where I would call in this situation at the same time. Like, just in general, if you're driving through a random neighborhood and you see something like that, I probably wouldn't call because you don't know what's going on there, and you don't want to be the weird person who's calling on that. But at the same time, if in, like, the circumstances that were presented in the novel, like, normally it looks like a normal house, and then all of a sudden there's, like, this metal up on the windows, that's kind of weird, and that would maybe be concerning enough that I would call. But I don't know. That's kind of where I fall in it. And I honestly, especially with the setup of their house, don't know how recognizable it would be anyways. But that was kind of my thoughts on that, is that maybe I'd call, depending on the circumstance, especially if they were someone you were maybe a little more acquaintanced with, then you might be like, something's odd about their house. But you'd maybe try to call them first, seeing something like that, and then, since in this case their phones have been disconnected and stuff, then be like, okay, something weird's going on, and then call the police. But I don't know. It's interesting to think about these things, and just kind of some fun thought experiments have come from this book for me. And then the final question that I've got is, we send emails and Facebook messages and IMs more than we actually visit our neighbors. America is run by faceless corporations, and if you don't show up, your coworkers don't check on you. You just get a pink slip from HR. And that was on page 159, because I don't think I said that at the start of this question. But anyways, again, kind of a, do you agree, do you disagree? Do you think your own family situation would handle this differently? Do you think, say, like, your extended family would notice if suddenly you were unreachable by phone? Does examining this through the context of this story make you want to change some of your relationships with people? So, for me, I think that it would very much depend on who was trying to contact me, how this would play out. For example, if it was work trying to contact me, it would probably play out something similar to what's in this story, because work is fairly impersonal overall. You're generally not, like, super close friends with people, even if you are friendly with people at work. So if you don't answer, you don't answer, and they just assume that you're skipping out or whatever. Fine. My family, I think, would notice, at least to some degree. Sometimes I'm not the best at answering like text messages and stuff, but I do usually answer phone calls, and especially if it went on for a period of a few hours or days, I think my family would notice. So it would depend on who was contacting me and in what fashion and that sort of a thing. And to some degree, I think that I kind of do want to be better with people, but I think that's also just partially quarantine in general, because you realize that the contact you thought you were getting with people, you're really not getting with people in the same way now that you're like all isolated and supposed to be mostly staying home and things. So I do kind of want to do better with some of it too. So that's kind of where I stand on that one. But that was all the questions that I'd asked for my book group. Now, on to the super fun bit. Let's talk about just the part that we've read in general. So, this basically covered them discovering that they're locked in their house, that they can't get out, the doors are stuck, that there's stuff blocking the windows, and leads up to what I felt like was a really good midpoint for the story, where I kind of addressed it with some of the questions, but that the mom is discovered to have been cheating on the husband, and that she had this secret phone number to call this guy and stuff. And so it was a really dramatic and interesting part, and I couldn't stop reading through it pretty much, and I'm really enjoying the suspense that's building up. I did have a few moments through some of it where I was a little surprised that we weren't getting any of the antagonist, whereas before we were switching between Jerry and the antagonist a little more. But at the same time, with the pacing of the events that were going on, I can understand why we stuck with just Jerry and didn't get any of the antagonist input. But it was just a little thing in the back of my mind every once in a while, like, it's been a while since we've had a chapter with him. But yeah, so it was really good, really intense, and really fun. I did, just for my own fun, also want to mention, if you happen to follow Michael Brent Collings on his Facebook right now, he's doing kind of quarantine posts where he's just doing a little dramatized version of his life that's devolved into some silly quarantine things where he's got this antagonist of his own life that's a wear coat rack thing that's going on his Facebook, and it's been really funny to read through that, and it's part of what's just making my quarantine go so happy and well. In some ways I look forward to reading those posts every day. But anyways, I wanted to bring that up because in Strangers, the family has gone into the office. They were trying to use the laptop. They kind of got it to work, and then it stopped working, and then they look down the hall, and there's this dark shadowy figure down at the end of the hall, and so they're like, let's go find out what's going on, and they're gonna go confront this person who just seems like they're just standing there as they approach them. And then it turns out to be their coat rack, basically. It's got a hat on top and a coat hanging on it or whatever, and I just burst out laughing. That was kind of their response to it too, because it was a relief of tension that them, but it was so funny to have been reading through all of Michael Brent Collings' posts on Facebook about how he's being tormented by this wear coat rack, and then for a coat rack to turn up in the book. Oh, I was living for it. It was great. So yeah, a fun thing if you want to go through it. His little quarantine posts are great. It's this sort of setup of day 1 of isolation, and then stuff happens, and he's up to day 40 or something now. I think he lives up in Idaho, so I don't know how long they've been doing quarantine. I don't know how long I've been doing quarantine, but there's a lot of those posts to go through if you're interested in looking into them, because they're very fun to read. So yeah, but that's all I've got to say for now about Strangers, and I can't wait to get into the next part and see what happens next, and keep delving into this family devolving into madness. I think that's all I've got for now, and this is the Uma Harper signing out.